Hi, I'm James from Chaosium. I sat down with Julia and we talked about merchandise. Specifically, we talked about how Chaosium makes all kinds of gear, props, equipment, whatever you might want to show that you're a fan. It's a complicated art that takes a lot of design, and Julia is our master of it. I'm going to jump across to that interview in just a moment. But first, remember to subscribe to the Chaosium YouTube channel. It helps us out and it lets us make more content like this. Thanks.
Yeah, so what I basically do is I handle the online merchandise business for Chaosium. Which is mostly at this point currently the Redbubble store that we've got. And I design the t-shirts, the posters, I apply the artwork that we sort of get out of, books that are being published by, Chaosium's main business, the tabletop RPG business, and apply that to, products which people can buy and then decorate themselves or their homes with. That's in essence what I do.
You're also a huge tabletop fan yourself, particularly of RuneQuest and Glorantha, unless I'm mistaken.
Yeah, but I love Cthulhu. I absolutely do love Cthulhu. I just think that for various reasons, RuneQuest and Glorantha has been like a longer presence in my life. And if that's kind of your first your first game, your first fantasy world and stuff like that, which you kind of grew up in, that's always got to be a very big part. Whereas Cthulhu, I was already I was always aware of Cthulhu. It's just that there wasn't quite as much of it around me as of RuneQuest. But Cthulhu was some of the first role-playing stuff I ever played. Actually played myself. Was actually, in fact, of Call of Cthulhu. So it's all good. It's all fantastic.
For people who might not know some of the wider professions that are part of the larger tabletop role-playing game sphere, can you talk a little bit about how you came into being the Merc of Merch, and how you fell into the role and how you've made it your own kind of artistically, creatively? Because some of the products that you have put together effectively on Redbubble are really, really fun. I've got a Glorantha duvet cover in the corner.
Awesome. Yeah. Oh, those are a big commitment. They are, if you got a duvet cover from our Redbubble store, that's showing real dedication. Those are probably the largest thing we've got on there. Yeah, the Merc of Merch thing, that was kind of weird. It's a very short story or a very long story, depending on how you slice it. The very short version was that Chaosium was looking for a new merchandise coordinator. That was about July 2000, I want to say 18, but don't quote me on that. I'm bad with numbers. So I was basically asked and said, do you want to do the merchandise coordinator role? I said, yeah, okay, I'll do it. And that's how I got the job. The reason that I was probably asked to do the merchandise coordinator role, which I is now speculation on my part, because that is not something I, massively have discussed or debated, is that I have in the past made my own Chaosium merchandise, or before was Chaosium, made my own Glorantha merchandise, made my own Cthulhu merchandise, because for the longest time none of that was available. I mean, you couldn't really get a lot of merchandise for anything. I mean, there was like Chaosium did really cool Cthulhu shirts, which we now also have, revived as a vintage line on the Redbubble store. But they did really cool shirts. But the problem was, to get those, you kind of had to go to the conventions in the States. I'm not in the States, I'm Germany. So you're kind of sitting here and saying, well, I really like Cthulhu. I really like, Glorantha. But I can't get a t-shirt any of this without sort of taking some artwork, going to a shop that prints t-shirts, and you get the pre-shirt t-shirt printed there, and so on and so forth. That was never my style. So what I basically did, I was starting, I used stencils and made my own, I've got an old shirt with an elder sign on it, which I stenciled up there. I've got some, old Glorantha stuff, some runes. That was all way before we had the Redbubble store, which is kind of now taking care of all of that. And means that people who don't want to mess around with paint and so on and so forth can get their own shirts and other things that wouldn't have really been possible for me to make myself. I mean, I could have made a duvet cover, I suppose, but it's a bit much work. So no, so I made a lot of stuff myself, and I used to sort of sometimes come to convention. I think one of the things I did, which some other people noticed, is I made my own sort of little notebook with a notebook cover of the second edition RuneQuest cover. Just got a good print out of that, put it on some MDF board, drilled some holes in the end, put some rings in there, had that sort of as my permanent notebook. Some people liked it. I think I gave Richard Parvis cover one at some point, and somebody else got one as well. So I was making my own merch, and I was putting them up on my social media and stuff like that. I was already friends with a lot of people who are now working for Chaosium because I've known them all my life. So a lot of that stuff got seen, and I suppose that was sort of played into me ending up with the merchandising role, because I was already doing it. I was just doing it on a manual basis. I wasn't sitting at my computer messing around with file types and all of that kind of thing. It was just me sitting there, cutting out a stencil, lots of paint everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and trying to make some new t-shirts for the next convention season. So I started at the bottom with this.
I know that there must be a really great community surrounding all of the merch creation and things like that, because, these very serious fans like you were who want to create Chaosium merchandise tend to have really great creativity around the ideas and the ways that they want to show their support for Chaosium. How do you get some of the ideas for the merch that you create?
Well, a lot of his stuff is, I mean, as I said, it's very, the artwork we generally speaking are dealing with is artwork that is produced as I don't want to say side product, because that doesn't really do justice to some of the amazing art, but it is the primary purpose is to be in the books, and the artwork then ends up with me, and I see what works. And obviously I'm also limited by what Redbubble, for instance, can do. So if there's a product that I would like to see, but it's not something that's practical for Redbubble, then I'm going to possibly not be able to do that. I mean, I was asked at some point and said, oh, can you do, Glorantha wallets? And I was like, that's a really cool idea. I've got a really good idea for a design. But the way this merchandise stuff works, I can't make this because, as everybody knows, Chaosium is a very, we're not defined to one single local space. We can't really run a warehouse which just has our merchandise in it. So we can't, it would be very difficult for Chaosium to go to a workshop or factory and say, we've got this merchandise idea, work with the designer, say, we want this merchandise made, and then ends up in the warehouse, and then it's in the warehouse, and then we'd need to get it everywhere else, and that's just not practical. So the big limitation is really, it needs to be something that can be made somewhere else by someone else and then distribute it to the fans wherever they are. And for that reason, a lot of the really cool creative stuff I'd love to do under the current circumstances isn't really possible. So I work with what I've got. I know that a map will always look really good on a big duvet. Because that's just, you actually get to see the full map. That's fantastic. And there's some stuff that works better there on some things. But there's also t-shirt designs where the design takes up the whole chest section apart from the sleeves. And sometimes if I'm sitting there at Redbubble, I'm blowing up a picture, trying to make it fit on there, and I say, yeah, now you can't see the best part of the picture anymore. This is not a product that I'm going to be able to offer because I don't feel good about this. I wouldn't want this. And that's always something you need to bear in mind. I mean, I could throw absolutely everything, put everything on everything. But sometimes there's just products there which are either very, very difficult to set up, like the backpacks and the duffel bags. Those are very, very difficult to get right. And I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it wrong. I mean, people are going to be spending money on this. They're going to be excited for the thing getting there. And I don't want them to, sit there and get something and say, this doesn't actually look as cool as I imagined it or something like that, because that's disappointing.
No, I totally understand, and I think it's good to take that extra, element of care. You mentioned that you have some ideas that logistically you haven't quite been able to go forward with. Can you tell us what some of the grand ideas you'd love to see implemented, if it was possible, would be?
Oh God, there's so many. As I said, somebody asked for wallets, and I was hearing wallets, and I said, oh, you need sort of a blessed by Issaries wallet, that kind of, I like that when you got something and you sort of say, it's not just a picture, but sometimes you can make something which says this makes kind of internal sense, this is, and a lot of that comes with Glorantha and runes, for instance. You can do fantastic things with runes because the runes are all describing various elements in the world and various forces. So one of the things I have actually made for someone, but which is something I can't do on Redbubble, for instance, I made a hip flask for a friend at some convention, and I put a spirit rune on it. And yeah, kind of a bit of lame, goofy joke, but on the other hand, it works, because you've got all these things. What I was able to do with Redbubble was, a water rune on a water bottle. That worked fine, but I can't do what we don't have. So that was that's sort of, that's one because somebody asked me for, which I had to say, yeah, sorry, we can't really do that. I'm a big fan of sort of embroidered patches and stuff like that. Unfortunately, Redbubble doesn't offer that, but sort of doing travel patches of various locations, for instance, from the Mask of Nyarlathotep campaign or something. So you can put them on your backpack and it looks like you've been all these places. And if you've played the campaign, hey, maybe you have been all these places. That would be very cool, but it's also something it's very difficult to offer because patches need to be set up by the factory and you need to order like a very substantial amount to make this viable. And as I said, got a warehousing problem, so that hasn't happened yet. I think I'm now just drawing a bit of a blank because, I didn't think about this properly beforehand, but there is a lot of stuff out there that would be really, really cool to do. And it's just, we need to warehouse it. We can't warehouse it, but there's other platforms out there which offer similar stuff to Redbubble. And there's a little bit of something, there's a little bit of wriggle room. There's a little bit extra. It's probably got to be coming up soonish, where we can do a couple more things that previously we haven't been able to do with Redbubble. So that's going to be fun when it happens.